Public trust in the news media has been on the decline for decades, but in 2020, as news consumption hits new highs, public confidence is hitting new lows. Is it possible for journalists to rebuild trust with their audiences? Joy Mayer is the director and co-founder of Trusting News. It's an organization that works with newsrooms and researchers to develop trust-building strategies and empower journalists to demonstrate credibility. Thank you so much for joining us today on NewsPoint 360.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is a worldwide phenomenon affecting print, broadcast, online news services. How prevalent is lack of trust in the media currently, and are those perceptions the same for local media as well as national?
Unfortunately, it is a growing problem globally, but it is especially a problem in the United States and in North America. I've done some training with European newsrooms that are in much better shape than we are here in the States where I am. The trust in local media is higher than trust in national media and in global media. People feel like they trust the media that they get their news from. This idea that I trust my media, I don't trust the media, but I trust my trusted news sources. So people have to spend their trust somewhere. They turn to somebody for information, and the choices are just getting dicier and more complicated in terms of where people choose to spend their trust.
Well, the lack of trust didn't happen overnight, but there have been a number of aggravating factors adding to the public's erosion of trust. So why is it so prevalent right now?
Well, you're absolutely right that it is a long time coming. In the United States, at least, trust peaked in the late 70s and has been in the decline ever since, along with trust in many other institutions. The decentralization of news is a real factor. The idea that people can get their news from anywhere and they can choose news that confirms their worldview and confirms their existing bias and therefore be unchallenged by information. That sort of decentralization and atomization of news is a big factor. You can exist within a bubble and just not even be exposed to information that challenges you to see the world in another way, and therefore you then don't trust anybody who is sharing a view on the world that doesn't conform to what you see in your life. And then, of course, the climate around fake news and journalists being the enemy of the people. There are a lot of people who are being told to and just genuinely feel as if journalists aren't on their side, as if they're not good for the world. The survey results are depressing, even for questions like, is journalism good for democracy? And people are split about whether journalism is even good for the health of our communities.
Well, by nature, journalism has a mandate to tell both sides of a story. Now, you can see how that would change during the course of a pandemic when getting correct information out is critical. But is this both sides approach still a tenet of news gathering?
Well, you're absolutely right that it is a sort of a long-time value of journalism that you tell both sides of a story. I think an important way to look at that is that you are open to where information takes you, as opposed to giving equal time to multiple sides. So at some point, we can decide that science has given us a set of facts, and that every time we cover an issue like climate science or like vaccinations, which will be a big deal over the next year, that we can say, here's what science tells us, and we don't have to give equal airtime to people who deny that science. Journalists have to make judgment calls about about the validity of perspectives and what is worthy of sharing. The important thing is that journalists go where facts lead them and are transparent about their process, so that the people trusting them for information can tell how they came to the conclusions they came to and why certain information is included.
Well, and there's also a big difference between editorial content, op-eds, analysis of an issue, versus reporting on a particular story. Have the lines been blurred, or is it really more a lack of understanding on the part of the news consumer, what they're watching?
Well, it's absolutely both of those factors. I think that journalists like to blame news consumers. If only people were smarter about what an editorial is, or what an opinion is, or what an analysis is. But man, has it gotten confusing. Especially when I turn on television and watch cable news, I'll realize that I can't tell who's talking. Is that person a reporter? Is that person an expert source? Are they paid to share their opinion or their perspective or help analyze something? Or are they paid just to share information? It can be remarkably hard to tell. So at the journalism industry, I think, is overdue for a reckoning around how we label and share types of content so that people can tell what the purpose of that content is. And also overdue for a reckoning on where we do let opinions creep into content that is designed to just be news. I think we see ourselves as sort of analysts and guides through news, when sometimes we know that news audiences often are feeling just tell me what I need to know. Don't tell me what to think. Just give me the information. And we need to do a better job of that.
Well, just looking back at the election, do you think any news organizations and journalists succeeded at their efforts to build better trust during the election campaign? What do they need to be doing to reestablish that credibility?
I think that, first of all, it's really important to acknowledge that there's a lot of irresponsible information out there. There are a lot of irresponsible things done in the name of journalism, and it is completely valid for news consumers both to have high standards and to be really frustrated and overwhelmed and confused. So I think that what responsible journalists need to do is explain what their standards are, what their values are, and what sets them apart. So teach your audiences to have high standards about your ethics. Talk about what your ethics policies are. Explain your sourcing. Explain how you decide what to cover. I think transparency is a really important step toward earning trust and showing that you're willing to be held accountable for being trustworthy. I think there was a lot of I was heartened by a lot of what I saw during the election season. I think a transparency around the calling of results in the states and reminding people that it was going to take a while to count the votes. I think there was a lot of sort of more measured approach to especially election day. But I still think there's far too much election coverage globally often that looks at sort of horse race coverage and who's ahead in the polls and what do they mean and treats it like sort of a game or a match instead of really listening to communities and what information they need and what's important to them so that they can basically hire their leaders from a really informed point.
Well, what should news readers, audiences be looking for in the publications, the broadcasts that are worthy of their trust?
They should be looking at ownership and funding and how news is funded. They should be looking at ethics policies and accuracy policies. There are still a lot of news organizations that don't tell you when they've messed up. Reputable news organizations will publicly correct errors and draw your attention to those errors. They should be clear about whether they, what sort of drives their work, what values drive their work, and how they make decisions. So I think that holding journalists accountable for transparency and for having high standards is important. If you go to a news website and you can't tell who owns them, where their money comes from, what their ethics policies are, how they ensure accuracy, who their staff is, how you can contact that staff. Those are all ingredients for an organization that's willing to be held accountable for providing quality information.
Well, it seems the profession has its work cut out for it to reestablish the bonds of trust. Joy Mayer, thanks so much for being here and for organizations like Trusting News to help journalists get to where they need to be.
Thank you very much.